1963 is without a doubt the breakthrough pivotal year. I call it the tipping point. After all, this is 9 years after the Supreme Court says that segregation is incompatible with America's constitutional commitment to equal citizenship. And very little had happened, although there had been a lot of controversy. You had the bus boycott, you had Little Rock, and we had to send troops in, and you had the sit-ins and the freedom rides, and it was definitely percolating. But the segregation laws were still in place, and nothing really had changed, and black people couldn't vote in the South, and you were stuck in what Bob Moses, another leader with Dr. King, said was the great paradox. How do you get the vote without power and power without the vote in a totally segregated caste system? And January 1963, exactly 50 years ago, is when Dr. King made up his mind that he was going to have to take greater risk, that the movement might be losing its window in history, and he began planning to go into Birmingham to organize his own campaign. His modus operandi before that had been somebody would start a movement or a protest, and he would go in to support him. He would be what he called a fireman. And he said, I don't want to be a fireman anymore. I want to organize something and try to go for broke, because we need to have a sign of progress that we can hang on to. And so that's when he started. He prepared for 3 months and started the demonstrations in April. They fizzled quickly. Nothing went according to plan. He wrote his letter from Birmingham jail, which nobody paid any attention to at the time. He couldn't get it published. The reaction of the newspapers was that it was another long-winded Martin Luther King sermon and not newsworthy. A lot of people think that it's that the letter converted America. What's historically accurate instead is that when he made this supreme gamble of his whole career and allowed small children to march in Birmingham because the adults had fizzled out and were afraid, and Birmingham was so flummoxed by this that they brought out dogs and fire hoses, and the children marched right into them, and there were news photographs of that. You can see, anybody can understand what a grave decision that was, to allow the children to march. And nearly all of them marched without the permission of their parents. The children sneaked out. They went out through the window. They left their schools. There was one school famously where the principal was trying to keep the kids in because he heard that they wanted to go out and march, and they literally trampled one of the fences in the schoolyard and went down and took part in the march. So yes, this was one of the tremendous gambles in history, and ironically, nobody in adult society since then has really analyzed its effect, which upsets me a lot. I mean, because if you go to university campuses in politics, you can see people write PhD dissertations on the most minute political subject about, you know, how a new form of attack ad shifted 2 Senate seats in the 1986 election or stuff. But here is something that shifted the whole fulcrum of American politics and eventually the partisan structure of American politics. And it's because of what school children did. You know, 8-year-old black girls, mostly girls, because more than half the people who went to jail were girls. And it's so embarrassing or so out of the ordinary or so beyond people's kin that basically it's drawn large silence. It's not really a subject. And, you know, I'm sorry for that, because I think it's a unique moment in history. I wrote in one of my books, including the short books, that I know of no precedent in all of history for the politics of a great nation turning on the witness of elementary school children, and that only in the literature of Passover in the Bible do we ascribe this kind of political effect. You know, that when Pharaoh, the firstborn in Egypt, were killed, Pharaoh finally said, okay, the Hebrews can go, the Hebrew slaves can leave. But that wasn't the active witness of the kids, they were just the victims. Here it's the active witness of these kids who were, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, I was 16 and doing my best to avoid the fearful civil rights movement when I saw the pictures of those kids, half my age, singing songs just like the ones I sang in church, marching into those dogs and fire hoses. It had a tremendous effect on me.